Hello everyone and welcome back to the final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. And for our final segment, we're what seems like a long time coming here on the show. We're going to be talking some basketball. I'm going to be updating you on the NBA MVP race. Is it firmly the Joker's to lose? Playing the best basketball of his career, or will some new blood usurp him this season? A lot of good candidates from 5 to 1 here. Yes, Nikola Jokic has a firm stranglehold on that number one position thus far, but let's talk about some certain players here from 5 to 1 that could potentially usurp him. Without further ado, let's talk some basketball, shall we, after what feels like forever in terms of when we last talked about it. So let's start off at the number 5, one of my favorite players in the NBA from my favorite team in the NBA, Jason Tatum with 25 to 1 odds, 28.8, 9.3, 5.7, 46.3% in the field. Bear in mind these stats were written a couple weeks ago, so ultimately Jason Tatum has been potentially outperforming these expectations, potentially coming a little bit under these stat lines that I'm talking about right now, but still kind of around the same area in terms of when I wrote these last week. So not necessarily too many changes in any of these stat lines, drastic ones at that. But I do think that Jason Tatum really has stepped up as the number one option for Boston. Kind of a little bit ahead of Jaylen Brown in that regard, but still, in terms of this team mentality for Boston, starting to become a little bit more of a number one option. But that certainly is the caveat there with a guy like Jason Tatum playing in this team environment. How do you create an opportunity for yourself to become the league's most valuable player when it seemingly feels like almost everyone on your team is a valuable player? Because you have so much depth. You have Derek White. You have Peyton Pritchard playing at an incredible level. You have Sam Hauser coming off the bench. You have everyone, despite all the injuries you've struggled with throughout the season as well. Kristaps, remember, still hasn't played that many games this season. Jaylen Brown's been dealing with a couple injuries. And you still have to use a lot of rotational depth, and they're playing at a high level, and this team mentality is still being implemented. I don't necessarily know how to create the image of a most valuable player in that environment, even though Jason Tatum is playing like a top 5 MVP candidate right now. And I just feel like he's not one of those players who'll be swayed by winning the big awards. He just wants championships on his resume. And yes, it might be something that might lead to some pundits and skeptics saying like, oh, he may not be one of the all-time great players because he didn't prove he was the most valuable player. But that's not his MO. That's not the Celtics team MO. Because I feel like the Celtics are trying to implement a game plan beyond the NBA, where superstars kind of dominate headlines. They're trying to create a mentality that teams win championships. And while Jason Tatum's proven to be the best player on this team, it's not like he's doing it at the detriment of everyone else, kind of like carrying the load, whereas some other players on this list kind of are. And as a result, look more attractive in terms of their MVP candidacy. But that does not mean that Jason Tatum does not deserve to be in the top 5 for this MVP race, because he certainly has been playing like one. It's just that I don't think he can win in this team-heavy environment there in Boston. So he sits at number 5. Then let's talk about Luka Doncic, someone who hasn't necessarily played that much this season. We're going to miss the next month because of a calf strain, so it's definitely going to impact the quote-unquote games requirement for his MVP candidacy, plus 750. But I still think he's someone who has a similar stats to Tatum, doing it on a Mavericks team that's kind of seen a little bit of a decline in terms of how they played in the postseason last year, getting to the NBA Finals. But I do feel like Luka is the ultimate heartbeat of that Mavs team. They're really going to struggle without him this next month. 28.8, 8.5, 8.1 stat line, 46.2% shooting from the field for Luka. But I feel like, one, the game's requirement is going to come back to bite him for how long he misses because of this calf strain. And two, this Mavs team just has really regressed the mean. I feel like they didn't get back to what they did best, which was play defense, rely on their six-man rotation, and ultimately rely on the pick and roll between Luka and Kyrie, creating mismatches in that regard. And Luka has been playing a little bit too much hero ball this season. And now that he's hurt, and this Mavs team has to stare at itself in the face and really decide how they're going to look moving forward in this next month and trying to stay afloat in that Western Conference playoff picture, I think that Luka certainly is going to have a lot to do to A, get this team back in contention, and B, bolster his own MVP candidacy if he should still have a viable case in terms of, like I said, the game requirement, because that always has to come back at some point. But still, Luka Doncic is an incredible player, and I still think the Mavs, much like last year, could have a second half surge that sees Luka Doncic play some of his best basketball and see this Mavericks team get back into postseason contention. So that could really help him, but right now he's at a disadvantageous position where he's missing a month. His team's most likely going to decline because of it, and once he comes back, we're going to have a mountain to climb to get back into postseason consideration, which will make his MVP case a lot more appealing. So that's why he sits at number 4 right now in these rankings. And the number 3 player, according to Vegas, Giannis at plus 500 in terms of his odds. 32.7, 11.6, 6.6, 61.3% shooting from field goal for Giannis this season in terms of his stat lines. So very impressive stat lines from one of the best two-way players in the NBA. But the problem here is he also, much like Luka Doncic, is fighting for his postseason life, but this time with a fully healthy Bucks roster. And I just think this reason for this Bucks decline down the Eastern Conference standings is because this roster is aging. Think about it. They brought in Damian Lillard, an older point guard. Brook Lopez is still there, an older center. Bobby Portis is still there, an older sixth man. So ultimately, this older Eastern Conference team has to keep up with the young Bucks of the Celtics, the Knicks, all these young teams, the Cavs even, still pretty young team. So that's why I feel like they're slowly sliding down the rankings here. But Giannis's play has really kept them afloat. And I think that the key to A, this Bucks team's success this year, and B, Giannis's success in terms of trying to compete for this MVP award, his second, I believe, of his career, will be his companionship with Damian Lillard. I feel like if both of them can get going and both of them can kind of coalesce in a way that allows both of them to bring out the best of their games, then that complementary style of basketball can prove appealing to voters in terms of Giannis's reactionary approach to trying to help this basketball team. Because right now it's a little bit too Giannis-centric still. I feel like we haven't seen the best of Damian Lillard, and while I don't necessarily think he's the best fit offensively for the Bucks, he still is their best floor stretcher. He still is kind of the point general of this team. And if Giannis can't recognize that sometimes Damian Lillard needs space to breathe, then that could be to a detriment to both the Bucks' postseason hopes and his MVP hope, because sometimes playing as a tandem really can appeal to voters and will show that Giannis isn't just a one-man show and he's willing to sacrifice for the benefit of his team. So that's why I feel like in the second half, look for Giannis and Damian Lillard to try to get right, and look for this Bucks team who were kind of mired in mediocrity in terms of the standings, kind of barely hanging on the play-in picture after an embarrassing loss to the Nets last night, still have to, find a way. And it all starts with Giannis' relationship with Damian Lillard on the court. So that's what I think stands in his way in terms of his MVP candidacy. Then let's get into the top two here. Starting off at number 2 at plus 250, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Let's talk about this young man. What an impressive young point guard we have in the NBA here, playing for an OKC team that could look to be the next great NBA dynasty. This is a young team, perhaps still the youngest team in the NBA, and I still think that this team has not even reached its ceiling yet. I think that both sides of the floor, they feel like they can improve, whether it be through player development, whether it be through kind of this SGA Chet Holmgren pick and roll game. There's a lot of eye candy with this offense, and Shea is the ultimate leader of it. And I feel like he can be the closest to usurping Jokic. And I feel like he's almost right there. But I still think that this OKC Thunder team might be a little bit disrespected by some pundits in terms of its youth. And I still think that a lot of these teams a lot of teams and pundits don't even realize how good the Thunder can become. Because I truly don't believe they reached their precipice. Yes, this team can be capable of winning 5 championships at the least in the next decade if they reach their ceiling. And SGA is the heartbeat of all of that. He is what makes this team tick offensively and defensively. Because of his play on the point guard position, he can be someone who is in this race for many years to come. But until then, he's not beating the number one, the Joker, the best card in the deck, Nikola Jokic, a plus 110. Pretty hefty divide between him and SGA, but still, 30.9, 12.5, 9.7, had 90 fantasy points and a triple-double on New Year's Eve, for God's sakes. That's the guy who we're talking about here. And until someone can prove that they're better than him, then they're going to be staring up at him for a long time. Yes, his team is not necessarily helping his case. Yes, the fact that he might only just have the one championship to fall back on. It will come back to bite him in the future. But for now, he's the best, most valuable player in the NBA, because without him, look at where the Denver Nuggets might reportedly be. They might not even be a play-in team without Nikola Jokic. That's the importance and value of Nikola Jokic to this Denver Nuggets organization. Without him, I don't know where they would be. So that's why he remains the number one player. But that will just about conclude today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. I've been Christopher Shepard. We'll be getting back to regularly scheduled programming next week. So see you Monday, 3:30 Eastern, this time for a live show. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network. Make yourselves available to when we get back to live streaming. The Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. But other than that, thank you all for tuning in to today's show. I am out. We'll see you next week.